in a landmark judgment that has sent shockwaves across the country. The Federal High Court in Abuja has handed down a life imprisonment sentence to Nnamdi Kanu, leader of the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, on terrorism charges. The ruling marks a significant development in the country's efforts to combat separatist movements and terrorism. As we examine the implications of this verdict, questions arise about the complexities of balancing national security with human rights and the potential impact on Nigeria's fragile unity. The case of Nnamdi Kanu is serving as a poignant reminder of the enduring power of ideology and the challenges of addressing regional grievances in a diverse and complex nation like Nigeria. This is the Eastern Eye. I am Alex Ogbodo. Welcome to the Eastern Eye, a program that x-rays the political, social, and economic developments around us. Joining me tonight is Barrister Ifeanyi Nwoga, a former prosecutor with the Federal Ministry of Justice and a former Honorable Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice, Enugu State. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on the Eastern Eye.
Thank you, Alex. It's a pleasure.
All right, so I guess that you already know what the verdict is. It's a life imprisonment for Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. I mean, in a clear court, in a clear moving proceeding in a court process, was that verdict expected at any point?
No, say that again.
As I'm saying that the verdict from Justice Omotosho of the High Court in Abuja, was it expected based on everything that has happened during this court process?
No. It was. Let me start this way. I think for majority of Igbo, today is not a good day. Not even from the justice that has been rendered, but from the perspective of what Nnamdi Kanu stands for. If you ask most Igbo people, they will tell you yes. I mean, based on regional sentiments and what's happening in today's Nigeria, yes, they will say this judgment was expected. They won't be surprised at the outcome of this judgment.
All right, so let's talk about how we got here in the first place, because
Yes.
this was a product of a process. And at a point in that process, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, threw away his legal representation. Talk to us about all that came together to actually yield to what happened today.
Don't forget that let's look at how the whole trial even began in the first place. Remember, Nnamdi Kanu had been charged under the 2011 Terrorism Act, and then how he was also accused of jumping bail. He said he was running for his dear life because if he hadn't gone, he probably could have been killed in his country home. And then there was a rendition of Nnamdi Kanu from Kenya into Nigeria after he bolted, and that when they said he jumped bail. And then his trial started all over again. And if you recall, he kept repeating that his trial was illegal, that he should not have been tried because the process of bringing him back was against the rules of international law and procedure. When that could not fly, the issue of jurisdiction of court also became an issue. Did Federal High Court have jurisdiction to try him under the Terrorism Act? You also recall that That issue of whether the Federal High Court had jurisdiction or not had to go through the Federal High Court, remember, before Justice Inyako, and then it went to Court of Appeal and eventually got to Supreme Court. And when the Supreme Court evaluated the matter, they remitted it back to the Federal High Court to say they had jurisdiction to try the matter. I don't know if this explains what you asked.
Yes, I totally flow with that. But then, at the end of the day, a lot of people who don't understand the legal processes are looking at it from the lens of people who are sympathetic to what Nnamdi Kanu represents. And this is where it gets twisted. They are just
Exactly.
seeing that he is being on trial because he wants Biafra. But listening to Justice James Omotosho today, there were a lot of things he listed arising from the processes Mazi Nnamdi Kanu may have employed in passing across
Yes,
his message and the consequences
that's right.
for those messages. Can you help us, put some of these things in perspective?
You see, we must learn to make a difference between a proper legal trial and political sentiments and emotion. I mean, it's not in doubt that the place that is called Igbo land today in Nigeria may not be having the best of Nigeria, which is why most Igbo people are complaining about marginalization. But then Nigeria is not a lawless society. We have laws that guide both our criminal justice jurisprudence and the other facets of life. And when you are caught within the web of these criminal laws, you must defend yourself devoid of sentiments. And part of the problem we have is we've not been able to draw a line between what is legal and what is political. There might be some relationship, but then because it's a criminal trial, there was need for whoever was involved to understand the technicality of what was involved. Once you are charged before any court in Nigeria on the basis of crime, it is incumbent on you to defend yourself using all legal means to make sure you do not go to jail. I think in this particular matter, emotion took over reality and reason. And that is why we are where we are today. Criminal trial is very technical. It requires expertise. It requires guidance. And more importantly, it requires the expertise of a lawyer who is trained in that act to know what questions to ask, to know what queries to raise, to know how to guide a defendant on how he should proceed in his matter. Even when Mazi Nnamdi Kanu raised the issue of jurisdiction, if we are being honest and practical, under the new Administration of Criminal Justice Act, which was enacted in 2015, which was on the basis of how do we speed up the dispensation of justice, trial, how do we overcrowd, how do we avoid overcrowding in our custodial system. That act had said, even when you raise issue of jurisdiction, it can be brought up in an address, in your final address before the court. So some of the issues that Nnamdi Kanu raised in court were some of the issues that would have been brought at the point of address. The lawyers will have guided him. Because the moment you make a no-case submission and place reliance on the evidence that had been produced and adduced by the prosecution, you run a great risk. And then The judge goes on to say to you, after ruling on that no case submission, to say to you, you have a case to answer. That should show you the direction of the court. The moment you do not allow your lawyers do the job and you take up the matter, you will be in dangerous waters. You know, even as lawyers, if I have a criminal case hanging around my neck, I will not defend myself. I will want a colleague of mine to defend me. Because when you defend yourself, a lot of sentiments come in, a lot of emotion come in, and there is a tendency that you make mistakes. Look at during the military era. Remember, even Gani Fayewemi, when each time you see Gani defending himself, if we are privileged to be in court, you will see sometimes he becomes so emotional. Just like what you see Nnamdi Kanu do. Because any man that is down needs fear no fall. That's why some of those things, yes, some people might say, oh, he couldn't manage himself, he would have been a little more comported and all that. The honest truth is, if you are in his shoes, you could even do worse. But then, he still needed to be guided. And it's important that we begin to draw a line between semantics, emotional outbursts, and legalese. Is very important.
All right. I mean, the issues around the case brought against Mazi Nnamdi Kanu. The question now, in some quarters, whether it was strong enough to warrant a life sentence, or were there weaknesses that could be exploited on appeal. And by the way, I heard one of the persons who used to represent him said that they are going to file an appeal notice of appeal tomorrow. That's one of the, I've forgotten his name, he was there. This appeal will be made tomorrow. So do you think there are things on this case that give some grounds to appeal?
You see, of course, under Section 36 of our 1999 Constitution as amended, there's always the issue of fair hearing, the right to be heard at any point. Is his right to appeal. But I think his appeal will have had more substance if he had been able to file a proper defense and file an address. Because don't forget, under our criminal justice system, you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt before the prosecution can be said to have been delivered in any criminal trial. And I think if Nnamdi Kanu has allowed his lawyers to challenge the issues that have been raised, they could have tried to disparage some of the testimonies of the witnesses. They will have addressed some of the issues that were raised in the counts. Because if you look at the judgment, I think counts 1, 4, 5, and 6 were the ones that carried the death sentence.
That's correct.
And then I think count 3, the judge gave 20 years.
That's correct.
And count 7, he gave 3 years. And then he said those sentences were to run concurrently as a sign of showing mercy. I mean, for a man you've given life sentence, I don't know what other mercy you're showing to him. It's as good as a death sentence, But then, if you now say you want to go on appeal, you are only what the grounds will be, oh, the judge erred in law or he erred in fact. Don't forget, you are relying on the evidence, the proof of evidence that the prosecution had sent in, which, if you had done at the trial stage, will have given you a good opportunity to debunk some of those issues. So it's almost like you are going to fight with your one hand tied behind your back. So it creates a situation for him. Of course, he has a right of appeal. He can go on appeal, even up to Supreme Court. Alex, let me tell you something before I forget. In when I was a Minister of Defense as a lawyer sent there by Ministry of Justice. When Abiola declared as president in Ekpetedo, Lagos, I don't know if you recall, and he was charged to court on basis of treason. And then the issue then was they needed to grant Abiola bail. And the lawyers who were representing him then were insistent that even if he was going to be granted bail, that bail must be unconditional. We were in Ministry of Defense. I don't want to mention names. We reached out to some lawyers and say, even if they give him conditional bail, please let Abiola take it. Because there's some information we have here that some of you who are out in court there do not have. Even if they give him, because he who fights and runs away lives to fight another day. If you recall, Abiola was eventually given a conditional bail, and some lawyers insisted that he should not take the conditional bail except it was unconditional. You know the rest of the narrative. Once you have issues of treason hanging around you in Nigeria, or treasonable felony, and you have opportunity to bring out all the issues that will help you defend yourself, you do not throw it away. It's almost like throwing the baby away with the dead water. You practically foreclose all the things that could help you in securing your release. I hope Nnamdi Kanu's case will not go that way. Eventually, I'm sure the stakeholders in Igbo land and the intelligentsia will eventually intervene, and maybe there might be a presidential reprieve.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing, and a lot of people have raised the issue of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu's conduct in court. Do you think that maybe because Justice James Omotosho made reference to that, even the way he spoke to his lawyers, is it something that is heartwarming for someone who's been defended to speak to his legal representation in the way he has done? Especially after he dismissed his legal representation, it looks, a lot of people believe that at that point, he was no longer, speaking like someone who was trying to defend himself from terrorism charges.
Let me be honest with you. If you have been incarcerated to a point where you do not care anymore, you cannot guarantee how you will behave. You cannot. You see, he may have talked down on his lawyers. I think even I will also blame the judge in some way because he gave too much latitude for some of the things that happened in his court. I hope you know in most jurisdictions, whether it's a English law jurisdiction or American law jurisdiction, if you raise your voice too much, in England actually, if you're an accused person, you're almost like in a cage. Nobody sees you. America, yes, you can sit in the courtroom, but then you have the correctional officers around you. And once you raise issues or situation that might endanger the court, you'll be removed instantly. Okay? But I can understand the judge giving him that latitude to defend himself, air his views. But I tell you, I don't blame him for some of those outbursts. That is expected of a man that had been incarcerated for so long. That is my position, yeah.
Okay, great. So let's talk about how this might affect the whole saga of the Biafra struggle now that this sentence has been handed down. a lot of people were hoping that maybe if he's not sentenced, maybe if he walks free, maybe all the tension that followed the whole Biafra struggle will die down, and maybe the long-awaited lasting peace and quiet will come here. How do you think this may impact that?
Honestly speaking, like I said, is a sad day for a lot of Igbo people because this is an Igbo man that has been incarcerated. Do we approve of some of his actions? Of course, no. But what affects one affects all. Uh, I don't know. I think if you ask me, I will say I belong to the Igbo intelligentsia. And I will tell you with all forthrightness that I do not see us achieving Biafra the way we are going about it now. I do not. I think there may have to be some more matured and more educated way of going about it. And you can begin to see that even beyond Biafra, there have been agitation for Ududua. I think somewhere in also North Central, there's been some agitation. Remember, Ogoni then also, there used to be also agitation of Niger Delta trying to secede from Nigeria. I think it's something that has to be politically resolved. It's not something that has to be by way of violence, intimidation, or semantics or this emotional outburst. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. Maybe eventually common sense will prevail. The Igbo man might begin to sit down and become more realistic and understand that there is need for a little more organizational skills, that need to be put into this if we must do Biafra. But not the way it's being bandied about. I don't see us getting any Biafra.
All right, we'll take a break at this point. When we return, we'll talk about the court's decision not to impose the death penalty and opted for life sentence instead of that. That's after the break, and I'll get the thoughts of Barrister Nwoga on the matter. Stay with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome back to the Eastern Eye here on Afia TV, a program that x-rays the political, social, and economic developments around us. I still have Barrister Ifeanyi Nwoga on the line with me. And let's talk about the court's decision not to impose the death penalty, which they are suggesting is a degree of leniency. That's how Justice Omotosho is putting it. Do you think this was a pragmatic decision, or could it be perceived as a missed opportunity to send a stronger message to, separatist groups, maybe?
No. I think we should understand it from the innovations and dynamics that is happening within our criminal justice system. It was not issue of being leniency because if you look at the African Charter on Human Rights, you look at the different look at the International Convent on Political and Civil Rights, and then look at also some of the effort of the United Nations towards the advocacy to avoid the death penalty in most crimes. So and Nigeria is a signatory to some of these protocols. So I am not surprised because there is some kind of progressive move towards restorative and rehabilitative sectors of justice or justice system, where we are no more dealing with so much on punitive and deterrence punishment. So that, I think, is what Justice Omotosho was leaning into when he decided not to invoke the death sentence on Nnamdi Kanu. He was only toeing what I might call international benchmarks, which is also in alignment with our Administration of Criminal Justice Act. So there is less emphasis now on punitive and deterrent punishment. But you see, looking at the gravity of the offenses against Nnamdi Kanu, if it was possible, he could have even had given him a time-lined punishment and not a life sentence. But that was the best he could do in the circumstance.
So, I mean, the whole idea, because you mentioned you have life sentence, 20 years of prison, 3 years of prison.
Yes, yes.
So, of course, they say it's going to run concurrently. I mean,
Concurrently, yeah. They are all like wrapped together. So the 20 years within the life sentence, the 3 years within the life sentence. So everything was going to run together. Yes. So
let's talk about the role of Radio Biafra in all this, in promoting the separatist ideology.
yes,
It was a key aspect of the prosecution's case. Do you think
yes.
that the court's decision will have a chilling effect on freedom of expression in Nigeria, or is it a justified restriction on hate speech?
No, if you ask me, just like you have done, I do not think is a stain on freedom of expression. Because even within that freedom of expression, and if you have to open a radio Biafra or a radio station, there are still rules, there are still processes and procedure that guide how these things are initiated and how they become operational. And that's why you have the NBC, which is the National Broadcasting Commission. And there is an act that determines how these things operate. It's only when you now go and you are unable to meet the terms of engagement, that's when you now begin to say, okay, am I being denied this because I didn't meet those terms? Or am I being denied this because there's a political undertone to it? You cannot just exist on your own when there are processes and procedure. You have to engage. You have to obtain the necessary permits and approval for you to do that. I mean, anybody can get up tomorrow in Nigeria and say, oh, I'm running company A or I'm running company B, or I want to produce water in my backyard. Nobody says you can't do that. But if you must do that and people must consume it, then you must come to terms with the processes that says this is what terms you must fulfill before you begin the production of water in your compound. So if you're running Radio Biafra in UK for whatever is what, maybe at the shortwave band, and people tune into it, and you say whatever, nobody is going to checkmate you on that. But if you must come here and be operational in Nigeria, it is incumbent on you to obtain all lawful and legal permits before you can work. The law is no respecter of person. And let me reiterate, Alex. People say the law does not work in Nigeria. Just don't be caught within the web of that law. Then you will know that laws work in Nigeria.
Especially as sensitive as it is, if it's something that they want to set an example with.
Example. Exactly.
But there is another leg to the
Yeah.
argument.
Yeah.
The new thing is that Mazi Nnamdi Kanu, yes, did a few things with Radio Biafra, but the argument is that there are people who are terrorists in the north who get reinstated into the Nigerian army. They say they are repented, they've been de-radicalized. And the argument is, are the laws applying differently to different people in Nigeria? Because you've seen how terrorists from the north or bandits from the north are handled. They get negotiated with. The government officials even appear negotiating with them, but Mazi Nnamdi Kanu cannot get a reprieve. So is there something we are missing, or we are not understanding it?
You see, now we are delving into the political questions. We're no more. We're leaving the legal.
Yes.
We're leaving the legal space and delving into the political space. But let me be honestly frank with you, and this is where we complain a lot when things happen in this country. It's not only in terms of banditry or kidnapping or terrorists that happens in the north. We've even seen situations where certain monies are earmarked in the National Assembly for development within the country, and the Southeast is totally excluded. How do you explain that? I mean, who is responsible for this? It still, if you ask me, it still dovetails into the issue of whether we have been fully accepted into Nigeria after the Civil War. Because, and that is why you see the agitation you're seeing today. That's why you see the anger, that you notice on the faces of our youths, because they cannot take some of the things some of us who are older have taken. For them, it's like that is even a better option if we can't get the kind of right standing we want within our society. So, whether there are different applications of this law to different individuals or different situations, there are issues that we must interrogate, because it's either Nigeria remains one and then act as one. I tell you, I'm doing a PhD in law, which I'm completing sometime early next year. And some of the issues we keep interrogating is the multifaceted nature of the kind of criminal laws we have in Nigeria. You have a constitution that is a grand norm. Yet, there are certain things that happen in this country, the same offense that you commit in the South, which is under the criminal code, you have a harsher sentence, and somewhere under the penal code, you have a lighter sentence. So there is need for some kind of harmonization. We must question some issues that truly, truly are detrimental to the existence of this country. If we're not willing to interrogate it, then we're not serious about working as a nation.
So let's talk about the issue of a potential presidential pardon. Is it too early in the day to talk about that? There was a
To,
point. There was a point in the trial that everyone thought Mazi Nnamdi Kanu was going to be released. I'm sure you saw all those posts flying around that Mazi Nnamdi Kanu was going to be released, and then suddenly everywhere became quiet again. Do you think that now that the court has concluded, especially now, yes, he can appeal, but now the only solution, maybe for some people, the way they are seeing it, is a political solution? Do you think that Mazi Nnamdi Kanu is ready for a political solution? Because there are two legs to this. One is what Mazi Nnamdi Kanu wants, and the other is what other interest groups in Igbo land, what they want.
you see, let me put it this way. It's no more about what Nnamdi Kanu wants. Because once you have a sentence and a conviction, then you begin to serve your sentence. And then suddenly it dawns on you that no matter how hot-headed, no matter how you think you were prepared for this course, that somehow a damage has been done. Okay? Of course, there's been a lot of clamor to see how some kind of political solution can be found to the issue of Nnamdi Kanu. As a prosecutor, I knew Nnamdi Kanu would be convicted. And I also knew that there will be no political solution until the legal trial had run through. Because if you were to do that, you will be setting a certain precedent that you might not be able to uphold in the future. So it was good that this has run through. Now it will begin to make sense to look, if we begin to look at the political solution aspect of the matter. And already there are a lot of people that are clamoring for it. And I am also sure that the president is not oblivious of the restiveness and insecurity in the Southeast. So definitely something has to be done. And if Nnamdi Kanu is critical and central to that insecurity, I think that issue will be addressed through either an outright release or some kind of conditional release. But whatever it is, I think it will be in his best interest to grab it. Because I say conditional because if they have to grant you that kind of political pardon, there may be conditions attached to it so that he doesn't suffer the kind of fate that Abiola suffered too.
So it looks like this is where the real tinkering and brain work comes in. A lot of people are even thinking that maybe Mazi Nnamdi Kanu will not accept the terms put before him, because one of the terms obviously will be do not talk about all those things anymore. Do you see that happening? Because it looks like the way he's speaking to everyone in court, do you see Mazi Nnamdi Kanu agreeing not to continue in what he's doing?
Now, you see, that was a man that has been frustrated by the system, by the law, and by his followership. I'm not surprised. That's an angry man. He's angry at the system, he's angry at the society, he's angry at the courts, he's angry at everything. I think common sense and reason will eventually prevail. I mean, Mandela was in prison for 29 years. Nnamdi Kanu has gotten to a point where, for him, whether he dies or lives is immaterial. But I think our elders, there are still people he listens to. I'm sure they will get across to him,
Do you
because
think there are still people Mazi Nnamdi Kanu listens to?
no, there are still people he listens to. And now that he has gone through this trial and a sentence has been given, I think he will be a much more sober individual. I don't know when last you visited the prisons.
Well, I mean, I've been there.
Okay.
Without
If you
revealing
if you if you if you
what the timeline is,
good, if you
I've been there. I
remember
mean,
when
it wasn't pleasant. It wasn't
if you
pleasant, obviously.
remember when President Obasanjo was during the DRQ, that they had to Abacha had to lock him up somewhere in Meduguri. There's always this born again kind of situation when you find yourself incarcerated in that kind of situation. You become born again. Your views may not be radically changed, but you begin to reason more better and more maturely.
So
And we have seen that.
yeah, I mean, it's something that obviously will define or redefine you and give
Yes.
you a mind shift.
Yes.
So, how fast do you think this can happen? Whatever intervention that can
For
happen.
whatever is what, uh, it might come before 2027
So that,
because that would obviously appease and assuage the feelings of the Igbo people.
but let us step back to the possibility of an appeal.
Yes.
What can an appeal do for this case? Because you've made the point about since he jettisoned his defense team, that it gives him little protection, nothing to fall back on. I mean, what can an appeal do for Mazi Nnamdi Kanu at this point?
I think we also need to understand how an appeal works. When an appeal is to be put up, you're not bringing fresh issues before the court. You are going to work from what has been put before the court of first instance, which in this case is the Federal High Court. Okay? And whatever grounds of appeal you're going to raise in your notice of appeal will be glimpsed from all the things that have been put before the judge and then the outcome, which is the judgment, because you're basically going to query aspects of that judgment. Remember, what are the issues against Nnamdi Kanu? That he was involved in terrorism, that he was the leader of a proscribed organization, and that he made broadcasts. Of course, the fallout of that broadcast was security agents were attacked, there were violence and there were destructions, okay, and so on and so forth. So, as a former prosecutor, I honestly do not see where that appeal will lead to. I do not. Because I don't know what new issues you're going to bring out, which is why I said if the lawyers had not been sacked and they probably had been there to put up a defense for him, they would have been able to address the issues of jurisdiction, the evidential value of the proof of evidence, and then whether the issues that were before the court were proved beyond reasonable doubt. Those were not done. See, criminal trial is very, very technical. Every lawyer does not understand it. And that's why you see in EFCC matters, in ICPC matters, in NAFDAC matters, in NDLE matters, you must train your lawyers to understand the technicalities of criminal trial. So, of course, it's their right to appeal. But who knows? We wish them luck.
And this is a good place to leave it. I have to thank you so much,
Thank you
Barrister.
so much, Alex.
Barrister Ifeanyi Nwoga. Barrister Ifeanyi Nwoga is, he's been a prosecutor for a decade and a half. And of course, he's a former Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice here in Enugu State. Thank you so much for talking to us on the Eastern Eye tonight.
Thank you, Alex.
And that's
It's
the Eastern.
nice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
And
Bye-bye.
that's the Eastern Eye for tonight. We'll be back here tomorrow, same time, for another episode of the program. My name is Alex Ogbodo. Good night.